Second reading today comes from the book of Isaiah, the second chapter. The word that Isaiah, son of Amoz, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Many people shall come and say, "Come, let us go up the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord." This is the word of the Lord. Our scripture readings on this first Sunday in Advent provide a vision of peace to a world that is all too acquainted with war. War and peace. It seems a sobering topic during these days of preparation before Christmas, but what is a pastor to do? Last summer, I was at the Lutheran Seminary in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, helping to lead a conference for young pastors. The seminary grounds are literally on the battlefield of one of the most famous encounters of the Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg was the bloodiest battle of that war. Walking the battlefields, I learned the bravery of our 1st Minnesota Regiment, who outmanned 5-1, famously filled a hole in the Union lines and later repelled Pickett's charge, effectively ending the Battle of Gettysburg and actually turning the tide of the war. But at what cost? 82% of the Minnesotans who fought on that day were either killed or wounded. Of the 1,009 soldiers who left Minnesota in 1861 to fight, only 325 returned home in 1864. Walking those fields, you couldn't help but be haunted by the death and destruction. There were 51,000 casualties in just 3 days of fighting at Gettysburg. Long before I knew that I would be preaching here this morning, my heart whispered these words from Isaiah that I have just read. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. American artist Winslow Homer spent the war on the front lines, but he wasn't fighting. He was chronicling what he saw with paint on canvas. And when the war ended, Homer created this large oil painting that actually portrays Isaiah's vision of a time when the tools of war are traded for the tools of agriculture. Homer paints a soldier here returned to his farm. It's a little hard to see, but a Union Army jacket and a canteen are discarded there in the lower right corner of the painting. The farmer has traded a battlefield for a wheat field, swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. The Bible is very clear about this vision for peace in Isaiah 2:4. And as Christians, that is the vision that we hope for, work for, live for and pray for. And this is why. What follows is based on an article, The Things They Carried, by Chris Jones in Esquire magazine. It's about Sergeant Joe Montgomery. Sergeant Montgomery was riding shotgun in Baghdad on May 22nd, 2007. The platoon was in 6 Humvees heading to complete an assignment on the edge of the city. An informant had told them that a farmer on the city's outskirts had a cache of weapons in his palm grove, and the platoon was going to walk out, shake down the house and the trees, and then walk back before light. Sergeant Montgomery was quieter than usual, perhaps thinking about the conversation that he just had with his wife and kids. It was his weekly phone call home, and Skyla had a question for him. Skyla was his wife Missy's daughter from an earlier relationship. And Skyla had been thinking that she would like her name to be Skyla Montgomery from now on. Sergeant Montgomery promised that they would sign those papers as soon as he got home. Then he'd asked to speak to Mom, and they hadn't been on the phone long before Missy heard an explosion. "I gotta go," he said, and he hung up. A few minutes later, a short email arrived. "I'm okay," was all that it said. Now, the custom was to rotate the squads through lead position. Tonight it was Sergeant Montgomery's squad's turn, and he volunteered, as he often did, to walk point. Ross would take second position, Gilliland third. Ross and Gilliland ribbed Monty all the time about his age. Now, only in the Army could a 29-year-old man be called Gramps or Father Time. But it was good-natured ribbing, because those boys loved Monty. They loved him because he was first in that line. And if he was scared, and he was almost certainly scared, he never let them see it. There was only one path to take, bordered on either side by thick, waist-high grass. Suddenly, 2 sounds broke open the night. Crack, and then boom. Ross did a backflip. Gilliland was knocked down too. The rest of the men dropped and scattered. They crawled through the dirt and fell into a large crater in the middle of the path. Sergeant Montgomery's rifle was there, but he wasn't. Gilliland saw something about 20 feet to the left of the path. It was Sergeant Montgomery. His eyes were open, but his body stopped at the waist. They found his wallet, his ID card, his Marlboro Lights, and the laminated photographs of Missy and the 3 kids that he kept tucked inside his helmet. No one spoke. Some of them were in shock. All of them were covered in blood. Joey's brother Micah, who was also stationed in Iraq, was the first in the family to learn that Joey was dead, and he immediately thought of their mother. He knew it wouldn't be long before 2 grim strangers would knock on her door. And so he called his Aunt Vicky. "Hi, AV, it's me, Micah. It's about Joey." What about Joey? Is everything okay? No. Then Micah asked Vicky to go to his mom's house, not to tell her, please don't tell her, but to be with her when the soldiers walked up her driveway past the tree with the 2 yellow ribbons hanging on it. Joey's mom, Gail, saw Vicky get out of her truck, and she saw that Vicky was shaking. Gail opened the door. No. And she began to cry, and Vicky began to cry too. "Which one?" Gail said. And Vicky could only mouth the word, "Joey." "Not my baby, not my baby." It seems her first husband, Joe's father, Robert Joe Montgomery Sr., had died in a car wreck in the 17th year of their marriage. She had taken to calling the boy Joey my miracle baby because she had learned that she was pregnant the day after Joey's father's funeral. And now she had lost Joey too. Soon after, Ryan Heacock, Joey's best friend in Scottsburg, Indiana, got the news too. And Ryan's first instinct was to call Joey's wife Missy. It turned out to be a bad instinct. In Fort Richardson, Alaska, word had spread that one of Charlie's troops' wives would be finding out that she was now a widow. And as was the practice, women would gather together so that no one would be alone when she found out. Many of the women had gone to Joey and Missy's house. When the phone rang, Missy answered. "Missy," Ryan said, "I'm so sorry." And all Ryan could hear was the clatter of the phone as it hit the floor. They put Sergeant Montgomery back together as best they could for viewability. They built a right hand out of gauze and cotton and similarly stuffed the legs of his uniform pants. The family met the casket at the airport, and Missy walked up to it, buried her face in the flag, and wept. The next day, his mother Gail sat in the front row of Scottsburg United Methodist Church and dried her eyes. She was sad, and she was angry. Robert Joe Montgomery Jr. had been among the first babies baptized in that church. His name inked in the records book in careful cursive at the top of the first page. Gail remembered so clearly holding him that day, his little head poking out from the top of his blanket. Now Gail stared at his casket poking out from under the flag. She looked across the front of the church and saw her grandchildren, 9-year-old Skyla, 7-year-old Robert Joe, 2-year-old Ella, children who, like Joey, would now grow up without a father. There were so many people in the church that they had opened an overflow room downstairs, and more were standing outside. Looking at the faces of the family, those gathered could know that Joey was loved. Looking at his friends in their black concert t-shirts, they could guess that he liked 9-inch nails. Looking at his Aunt Vicky standing behind the pulpit and holding it together just long enough to recite one of Joey's poems, they could know that he liked to write. Looking at his flag-draped casket, they could be certain that he was a soldier. Looking at Brigadier General Brenda Pinckney giving Missy both a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, they could deduce that he was very brave. But all Gail knew now was that her miracle baby was dead. At the cemetery, kilted bagpipers played Amazing Grace. Then 7 soldiers stood in a stiff line and fired 3 volleys each. A bugler played the 24 notes of taps. 2 soldiers with shaking hands folded the flag, and General Pinckney dropped to her knees in front of Missy and said, "This flag is presented on behalf of a grateful nation and the United States Army in appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." And then it was over. The funeral director shoveled dirt on top of the grave and placed a temporary memorial marker. Sergeant Joe Montgomery, 1977 to 2007. War is declared by politicians. War is romanticized by Hollywood producers. War is argued by journalists and armchair analysts. But war is fought by soldiers. And these soldiers are men and women who should be too young to die. And yet, sometimes, they do. I have little confidence in the ability of the world leaders to stop the hideousness of war. But I have complete faith in the one who reaches out his hand from a bed of straw in a Bethlehem stable. The one who the angels called the Prince of Peace. Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus Christ, the single reconciling force in the universe. And that is why we Christians spend these gray days of Advent achingly praying for peace, longing for the day when they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and neither shall they learn war anymore. And soldiers like Joe Montgomery won't have to die. Amen.